Words.
Seems good.
hmm Harrow Month is coming to a close, but a full analysis of all things Harrow would not be complete without going into the various rules that exist to help you bring a Harrow-themed character to life. And who better to talk to about rules than the Everyman Gamer himself, Alex Agunas. How you doing, Alex?
I'm doing pretty good. How are you today, Ryan?
Good. No time to talk.
No!
No, I'm doing fine. I wish I could tell you how exciting Harrow Month has been, but we are recording this in the future. No, we're recording this in the past. So we
Hey,
have no idea how Harrow Month has gone.
hey, I don't know about you, but I already have a couple articles written at this point, so I know how my Harrow month is going, and it's going to be going great.
This is the first thing I'm doing, even though it's probably going to be the last thing on the site related to Harrow Month, besides maybe some kind of wrap-up.
No, irony's good for that.
I don't think that counts as irony.
I think it counts as irony, but I'll stop talking so we can get talking about all the delicious horror-themed stuff on our agenda today.
A lot of the reason that we wanted to do Harrow Month is because of a book that we're going to talk about extensively this episode, which is the Harrow Handbook. It's a player companion book, and it showed just how far you can go with the concept of Harrow as a power source. If people aren't familiar with 4th edition had some small rule element called power source, which was basically where the power came from. So if you were a wizard, you had an arcane power source, and other things like barbarians had nature power source or emotion power source. In any case, it was this vague little rule thing that would occasionally come up that I think had a lot of potential. And something that really shows off that potential is using something a little more vague, like Harrow as a power source. So Harrow are magical fortune cards, which gives you all kinds of ideas of directions you can take that power source and turn it into rules. So, for example, most of these will be using the magic cards element to it or the fortune-telling element of it. But at least one of the archetypes we're going to be talking about, the Sarny Swindler, uses the idea that, you know what, in real life, fortune tellers are a bunch of crooks that are just taking your money. So it allows a lot of interesting interpretations that turn into really interesting rules. But before the Harrow Handbook came out, most of the original Harrow options came out in the original Pathfinder campaign setting book, which was reprinted and updated into Pathfinder campaign setting Inner Sea World Guide. So we're going to be talking first about the options that came out in the Inner Sea World Guide, starting with the Harrow deck. Alex, what can you say about the Harrow deck that appears in the, I believe it's Chapter 7 of the Inner Sea World Guide?
It costs 100 gold and it doesn't weigh anything, Ryan.
Indeed. And rules as written, it does nothing else.
It's a very boring item in that regard, and I have to wonder where that 100 gold is going to. You know, maybe that swindler archetype is like, oh, look at my deck. 100 gold for it because, you know, all those magical fortune-telling stuff. I mean, you know, in the modern day with tarot cards and whatnot, they're really not that expensive. You can buy a deck for like $20, so it's kind of funny to see that item at 100 gold, in my opinion.
Well, it is presented similar to how modern-day tarot cards, like the upscale ones, are. They're usually in a wooden box. They're usually wrapped up in velvet, and the idea is this will all preserve the magic of the cards. So, you know, when you're talking about medieval level of technology, limited access to magic for commoners, all that craftsmanship that goes into Harrow deck, which is potentially an actual magical item in the right hands, you could see where the 100 gold might come from.
Oh yeah, and you know, especially if we're talking about some nice velvet and a nice wooden box, you know, maybe we'll fluff it to be dark wood or something. And while we're on that topic, you know, one of the interesting things about the Harrow deck is that it does certain. I mean, like, you know, granted, Golarion is a campaign setting where you assume that there is a decent amount of magic available in the world, but like, assuming that in all the artwork we've seen of the Harrow deck, that quality of artwork in the campaign setting is the same as what we see on our cards that you buy from like Paizo, it's actually really impressive, and I think that would be worth 100 gold for that artwork during that time.
It's true. It's a lot of original art.
Lot of original art. But why don't we talk about something that actually has some mechanical benefit to it?
All right. The first of the Harrow options that actually does something is Harrowed, which is a feat, and actually I I like it both in that it's useful all the time, and there's a random chance that it's useful, particularly in some situations. So what does Harrow do?
Well, Harrowed is a +1 bonus on willed saves to resist enchantment effects, which is pretty useful, especially if you already have that kind of bonus, like you're an elf or you have the Iron Will feat. And then you can also use the feat once per day in order to randomly draw a card from your Harrow deck. And if you make a skill check or an ability check right afterwards, you get a bonus on a roll based on the suit. Like if you get the what is it? Crowns is charisma, I think. So if you get a crowns card, then you get a bonus on a charisma check. It's actually a pretty nifty, cool little feat.
And sorry, Alex, you're still there?
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay, sorry, you stopped so suddenly. And that's the first sign of one of the three ways that the Harrow deck is used. One of them is that the suits are tied into the ability scores. Another one is that the position of the suits is tied into the alignments. And then typically the card itself, the name, whatever it happens to be, in certain situations using certain mechanics, will also have a third effect, an associated effect. So right. In this case, it's a very straightforward. It's kind of like the introduction to the Harrow deck. And as you go up in level, or as you build a character that's more and more involved with the Harrow deck, you start to see just how tied into the mechanics the various of the Harrow deck are.
Definitely. Speaking of going up in levels, there is one way to gain levels with Harrow stuff that, well, at least in the Inner Sea World Guide, made you pretty good with them. We should probably talk about that next.
Would that be the Harrower Prestige class?
Oh, it certainly would. And let me tell you, there aren't many prestige classes in the Inner Sea World Guide. I believe there's 3 of Red Mantis Assassin, Harrower, and Low Templar. The Harrower is definitely one of the coolest of the 3, just because it's got a mechanic that really evolves as you level up. For those of you who've never seen the Harrower before, basically how it works is when you cast a spell, and it's a class that you have to be a spellcaster to get into, you get to draw a card from your Harrow deck. And when you first start off in the class, I think it's like level 2 or 3, you get a bonus if you draw a card from the, quote, Suite of Intelligence, unquote, which I believe translates to the Keys Suite, if you're actually using a real Harrow deck, right?
Close. The book.
Ah, the book. There we go. I always mix them up, so I apologize because I'm going to be doing it a lot, folks. So if you draw the book, you get this bonus, and I believe it's a +1 bonus on caster level checks made to penetrate spells, and considering that stacks with everything, that's already pretty good. But as you level up, the more cards you draw, or the more levels you get, you start to be able to add additional effects based on suite, and it actually comes out pretty cool because I believe you can draw like 3 cards at once with this one ability at some point. And you add all of these benefits, so it's like, hey, I drew strength, now I get to add a bonus on damage, or hey, I drew dexterity, now I get a dodge bonus until the end of the turn. I think the best one is probably the final one, which is Tower of Wisdom. Tower of Wisdom gives you just a flat caster level bonus to everything, and who doesn't love flat caster level bonuses? It also has a really neat ability where you turn your Harrow deck into a spinning dervish of death. We gotta love that.
Yeah, the idea of the Harrow deck as a weapon is not one of the most obvious ideas, and yet it comes up quite a lot in the game.
Oh, quite often, but we'll get to that later, won't we?
You did miss something that made me fall in love with the Harrower as a PC in the Harrower's party, and that is the Blessing of the Harrower, where you do a special ritual. Kathy does it at the beginning of the day in her Carrion Crown Harrower character, and depending on the majority of symbols, you gain a bonus. So +1 to hit, +1 to caster levels, +1 to saves, and that's everyone in the party that was witness to the harrowing.
Mm-hmm.
And this is cool because it's telling the fortune of the day, which prepares you for what you actually have to do, which translates into I'm hitting better because I know my future, because I know I'm going to have to hit better today. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
Yes, and that's definitely a theme with Harrow cards. I can't believe I forgot that one. Actually, no, I don't think I've ever noticed that ability before because I'm reading it now, and wow, That is really cool, especially since it's an insight bonus, and you don't really see insight bonuses that often, especially in like the core rulebook or in the advanced player's guide. We're starting to see a few more of them in the advanced class guide, in like the investigator and stuff, but it's not a very common bonus type, so that's really awesome.
And it's fun at the table whenever a new day starts. Usually, the caster just says, I memorize my spells, and the player doesn't actually do anything beyond that. But Kathy, as the Harrower, takes out her Harrow cards and lays it out in a grid of 3x3, and she's actually reading the cards to figure out what bonus we get. It makes it a much more interactive game element.
Oh yeah, that does sound really cool. Huh.
In fact, it's kind of inspired me to do something with the Harrow, something related to the Harrow. But she's already done the Harrower, so with other parts of the game, something that's not as well developed or as well supported, I might be like, well, I either copy Kathy's character or I just give up on this thing that she's inspired me to do. But no, in the case of the Harrowing, there's so much more we can do.
Oh yeah, there is a lot. There are spells, archetypes. It's really quite amazing how well supported this idea is, like this culture in Pathfinder. And speaking of that, let's talk about the Harrowing spell next, which I believe is the last Harrow-themed item from the Inner Sea World Guide.
We'll call it the last important one.
That's true. Okay.
So Harrowing, go ahead.
Well, no, you can go ahead and start. I did all the other ones.
Similar to Blessing of the Harrow, use the Harrow deck to tell yourself or someone else's fortune. Takes 10 minutes, so it's not a mid-combat fight, but it is a spell that lasts for multiple days. The duration is one day per level or until fulfilled. So you can get this. It's a third level spell for bards, sorcerer, wizards, and witches. So you can get it early on, cast it at the beginning of an adventure, and then within a couple of days, you'll finally be able to fulfill it. But you lay out the Harrowing, so once again, you perform the ritual, and it tells you how to do it with dice if you don't have the Harrow deck. But I recommend anyone that plans on doing something full on with the Harrow theme really invest in a Harrow deck, especially now that the deluxe Harrow deck is out. So you lay out your Harrowing, and then based on the majority of suits, it tells you what that person has in store, and if they have the correct alignment, then they get a bonus.
That's pretty awesome. Did you know there's a mythic version of that spell?
I'm not surprised.
Yeah, and actually in the new book they did a greater one too. So if you want a whole bunch of Harrowing themed spells and you're a Harrower, there's at least 2 you can grab. A third one if your DM is letting you play mythic. So why don't you go roll like a Harrower in a Wrath of the Righteous or something? I'm sure Param would love to run that for you. All right. So since those are the big 3 to come out of the Inner Sea World Guide, people who are interested in Harrow kind of didn't really have much else to go on besides those 3 for a very long time. And then not too long ago, it was only like in May when the Harrow Handbook came out. And it's a very interesting read. I definitely recommend it to anybody who hasn't picked it up. And I think I have a review of it on the website now. I'm not entirely sure when things are published since we're doing this in advance.
We've got it in an episode of No Direction.
Let's assume that at least Ryan and I have both talked about this book before. And when you go through this book, it's very interesting. One of the things I really like that has nothing to do with the mechanics, and I'm going to keep it short, is that there are little stories on every couple pages that tell you like the history of why a card exists in the Harrow deck. It's really interesting, and I definitely recommend picking it up, at least for the fiction, if you're not interested in the rules elements. But let's face it, the rules element in this book are awesome. And we're going to talk about a couple of them now. And I think we're going to start with the Cardcaster. How does that sound to you, Ryan?
Well, first, I think we need to talk about a really important feat that a lot of these archetypes share. That would be Deadly Dealer.
That feat is granted by the Cardcaster, so it still kind of works well. If you want to be Gambit, you basically take this feat. It's a pretty feat to get into. It's a little bit of a higher level feat. You need Arcane Strike, and you need Deadly, and you need I think 5 ranks in Sleight of Hand. So you're fast enough to actually grab the card and throw it. And basically, it turns all of your Harrow cards into darts, and you have to have the Arcane Strike ability up in order to do this, which means swift action every turn to throw Harrow cards at people. The Harrow cards do get the benefit of the enhancement bonus on that particular attack, which again is really, really nice. It basically means you are going to have a set of magical darts at your disposal at all the time, and you're going to look awesome while doing it, especially if you start spouting off a couple French phrases here and there, because that's what it is.
What's an unexpected side effect of this is that, as we mentioned earlier, the Harrow deck actually weighs nothing. So you're getting a full deck of pieces of ammunition, full deck of darts that won't weigh you down. So if you are a character with a low strength, as most casters are, most people that would take Arcane Strike would tend to be, I would say, this still gives you a benefit of having a last-minute ranged attack that does some damage. It's not going to be a significant amount, but at least it's giving you some kind of a damage-dealing option without weighing your character down.
Mm-hmm. The other thing to keep in mind, though, is that when you're using your deck as darts, the cards will normally are destroyed upon impact. They're treated as ammunition, so you have to roll to see if they go or not. And sadly, since they're not arrows, you can't make them into a durable deck, so there's always going to have a 50% chance of being destroyed on hit. And if you lose even one card from your deck, that deck can't be used as a divination tool. So you're probably going to want to spend 200 gold and get 2 fancy boxes with 2 sets of velvet for 2 decks, 1 to throw at people and 1 to actually do your divinations with.
I'm just going to correct you a little bit. It actually says the cards are destroyed when they're thrown. So unlike normal ammunition, you're just the use of the ammunition is killing it in this case.
Well, that's both kind of because you lose a pretty expensive card from a pretty expensive deck. But on the other hand, that is very Gambit, having the cards explode on impact. So there you go. Even more reason to be Gambit with this character, folks.
I don't remember ever seeing Gambit going and collecting his missed cards.
That's true. They just explode, and everybody's happier for it, except the people who... The other really cool thing about the Deadly Dealer feat that, sometimes even I forget it, is that if you have crafting feats, you can actually enhance the deck with magical item properties according to the rules, which means you can have a fully functional set of magical throwing darts at your disposal if you want to put the money into it. 100 gold isn't that expensive for a base magic enchantment cost for a weapon, especially when you see weapons like firearms just shooting your gold at people. Never mind. I love that about the gunslinger. But yeah, all in all, Deadly Dealer is an awesome feat if you want to be Gambit. And so many of the other options in this book build off of this one feat. It's unreal.
Which, it would have been cool if they mixed it up a little bit and you can use your cards as daggers or something, but then you've got a whole bunch of cards you're not using and just the one that you're using as a dagger. So it lends itself well to the idea that you're just tossing the cards as ammunition.
Yeah, definitely. And it also makes things a little bit simpler because you don't have to worry about remembering whether or not they're destroyed, apparently, which I guess at least speeds up play a little bit. Going from there, I already mentioned the card caster archetype. Mm-hmm. It's a Magus archetype. Essentially, this archetype modifies a lot of the Magus' early game in order to make it really good with this Deadly Dealer feat. Specifically, you get the ability to throw the darts without needing Arcane Strike, which is really cool. Normally, like we said, you have to spend a swift action in order to use Deadly Dealer. It's still a swift action to activate Arcane Pool in order to do this, but it'll last for a couple minutes. It'll last 1 minute baseline. There's a trait to bump it up to 2, and then there's a Magus Arcana that'll bump it up to 1 minute per Magus level. So you can make this benefit last a while and only really need that one swift action to activate your Deadly Dealer deck. In addition to that, it has what's probably one of the coolest versions of Spell Strike I've ever seen. Normally when an archetype for the Magus modifies Spell Strike, people get worried because that's kind of like the Magus' bread and butter ability in terms of doing damage. But this version changes Spell Strike, so you can only Spell Strike with the darts enhanced by your Deadly Dealer feat, but as a bonus, you can also use the darts to Spell Strike with any range spell that has a distance. It's not just touch attacks. So you can actually throw a card as part of a fireball, and wherever that card hits is where the fireball is exploding. it's a really cool special ability. And the other nice thing about this archetype is that it really doesn't modify too much beyond those couple special powers. For the most part, it's like, okay, well, here's Deadly Dealer. It activates when you use Arcane Pool. Your Arcane Pool only modifies Deadly Dealer, but here's a new list of special abilities you can use with the Arcane Pool. One of them is Brilliant Energy, which, again, Gambit. And then on top of that, you have this ranged Spell Strike ability, which lets you throw Shocking Grasp, Frigid Touches, and apparently now also Fireballs and similar spell effects.
Now, remind me, are there any other Magus archetypes that modify spell strikes so that it works with ranged weapons?
There is one. I can never remember the name of it. It's like the Memoradark, something like that. I know I'm saying the word wrong. I'm sorry, folks. This shouldn't really be much of a surprise. I'm going to pull out Ultimate Campaign. But yes, it is the only other one that modifies ranged spell strikes. Now, this archetype doesn't change spell strikes so that you can use ranged spells like the Cardcaster does, but it does let you spell strike with ranged weapons, and that archetype is called... Oh, I'm not going to be able to pronounce it. The Myr, M-Y-R, Mid, M-I-D, Myr Mid Arc, Myr Mid Arc. I have no idea. Do you have any idea how to pronounce that, Ryan?
That looks Gaelic, and I don't know how to phonetically pronounce Gaelic words.
So clearly someone needs to go on the forums and tell us how to pronounce this, because I have no clue. But yes, it specifically has a ranged spell strike ability, but it doesn't get it until 4th level. It actually doesn't replace regular spell strike. But and on top of that, it can't do this until 2 levels later. So the Cardcaster does have a couple things off on this super Gaelic, super hard to pronounce archetype.
Yeah, Google doesn't even know how to pronounce it. It doesn't recognize it as a word. So it might be a compound Gaelic word.
Lovely. I know I've seen it before, like in World of Warcraft, there are like salamanders with that word in their name. I just have no idea how to pronounce it. Wow. And I feel really incompetent at this whole pronunciation thing.
That's fine. So I was only asking because the idea that the Magus is one of those classes that has multiple ability score dependency, and by basing it completely on a dex-based build, you can be tossing your cards. You don't have to worry about your strength almost at all.
Nope, not really. Especially considering that deck weighs nothing.
Nothing at all. All the ammo you could ever need, never weighing anything.
Yes. It's definitely nice, especially when, you know, hey, I have this armor and whatnot, and the Cardcaster doesn't modify your ability to wear armor. So you could be walking around with, I guess if you wanted to, a mithril breastplate with a massive dexterity throwing cards at people. No one's stopping you. The darts themselves don't really do that much damage, though. It's like 1d4 for a dart. And then on top of that, I believe you get a strength bonus on your attack rolls, on your damage rolls with thrown weapons, but if you're dumping strength so you won't be multiple ability dependent, then you're not really too concerned about that. Let's face it, if you're a Magus and you're taking this build, you don't really care about that 1d4 you're doing with the dart. You're worried about that spell strike. Preferably that intensified spell strike.
Let's move on to the Cartomancer.
Oh, good cards.
The Cartomancer's version of Deadly Dealer has a very specific benefit that I wish more of these archetypes got this, or I wish was somewhere in their main feat, and that is that any cards they throw are not destroyed, and they gain the returning special weapon property. So you are just constantly tossing the same cards and still preserving a full deck, which you use as your familiar.
This is very true. It's very interesting because it says it functions like a familiar, but it doesn't say if like you gain the special familiar benefit, like, you know, how familiars will grant what's essentially a feat to their master. I'm inclined to say no, because you're always going to have your Harrow deck next to you, meaning that you can never really lose that. So I really think it comes down to the awesome, super cool ability you get at 3rd level, which is Deliver Touch spells, which essentially you can throw your cards as ranged touch attacks, and whatever you hit is going to go off of the spell. Now, at this point, all of you have probably seen my article on this topic, but you can do a lot of really fun things with this ability. since the article hasn't been published when Ryan and I are recording this, I was telling him today for the first time about how you can basically use the deck to start throwing cure spells at people, and because the cards specifically don't do damage when they hit, they just deliver the spell. There's no downside for throwing healing magic at people, which is great. Especially when you consider doing that is either a 4th level spell normally, meaning it's the Sacred Bond spell, or it's a Mythic Path ability. So it's a very hard to get power, and it's a power that works really, really well for this build, especially because you can combo it with Hedge Witch and spontaneously cast cure spells, and then you're just happy. I have nothing else to say. It's just really cool and fun.
It's a great image, and it diversifies what the witch can do, and it fits into the theme of the witch is like a wizard, but weirder. Everything the witch does is a weird version of the wizard, including just throwing cards that heal people.
Yeah.
Special delivery. Boom. Cure light wounds.
Now, I mean, if you want, you could replace that with an inflict light wound, so special delivery, my arm is now broken because you've hit me with this card. One thing I really like that this archetype does that most archetypes don't do, for at least for the witch, is that it alters how the witch gains her spells. Instead of communing with her familiar, she communes with this deck of cards. And it kind of reminds me of the special half-elf racial archetype in the Advanced Race Guide, where they get like a specific magic item and they meditate and pray with that item to become one with their patron. And just seeing cool different ways for witches to communicate with their patron is awesome, because let's face it, like I grew up with Hocus Pocus on the Disney Channel, and you can say what you want about that movie, but to me, having witches who consult an intelligent book for power is kind of like what I think of when I think of a witch. So seeing this kind of change in design for the witch is really cool. This archetype comes with a couple of really neat hexes too. One of them is called Soothsayer, which basically lets you prepare a couple of your buff and or debuff hexes in advance. You can actually target someone with like agony or misfortune or fortune and then trigger it later during the day when you want. So if you're doing like a Kingmaker game and you see someone that you know might be a problem, you can use Soothsayer to put agony on them in advance, and like maybe if they try to do something against you, you trigger agony on them, and if they fail their save, they sit there and start barfing all over the place. It's a really awesome witch hex. On top of that, you have the Harrow Blessing Witch Hex, which is sometimes a blessing and it's sometimes not, because it basically works like Bestow Curse. You can only do it to a target once. It's got that whether or not the target succeeds thing once per day. But you draw a card from your Harrow deck, and again, you should probably buy the deck for this because it's cool. And whatever suit your card is in, that's the ability score that's penalized. So if you draw the book, you penalize intelligence. If you draw the crown, you penalize charisma, and so on. They're very neat. The Magus has a couple too, but it doesn't really get as cool as that particular witch hex.
Now, I'm just going to correct a couple of things you said or clarify. You said that it comes with the Soothsayer. Soothsayer is one of the hexes it can choose, and so can a lot of other witches. It's also introduced in the same section. But more importantly, you said that you didn't think the spell deck worked like the familiar, but I'm going to read one line, and it's up to interpretation. But after it says that it replaces the witch's familiar, it says the following familiar ability works differently for a cartomancer, and it talks about deliver touch spells. The fact that it calls out one of the abilities is working differently, instead of just saying, but it still gets this ability, it feels like it actually does get all of the benefits of having familiar, only deliver touch spells is different.
You know what? That's very true. It's really that one sentence that's confusing, because nowhere else in the above paragraph does it say that, hey, this counts as a familiar. It actually only says that it functions as a familiar for the purpose of how spells are granted to the witch. So it's really up to your GM's interpretation for that one. I don't think there's a problem. I just don't know how you would choose which ability your Harrow deck grants. Like, hey, I'm always going to choose the one that's best for me, which, when I did the build, I didn't take it into account because it's not very clear. Maybe we'll get a word of God from a developer or something eventually, but for the time being, it's up to your GM. it probably won't affect you either way if you get a bonus every other witch gets. So whatever.
Next archetype, as far as alphabetics go, but this is the first archetype we get in the book, and it
Mhm.
is one of the stranger ones in the book, and that is the monk archetype Harrow Warden. And I say it's stranger in that it doesn't use cards, it doesn't have a Harrow deck, it doesn't tell fortunes. It just has strange named class features, like kind of vivid but vague class feature names that sort of tie into the Harrow thematically. It's a fairly cool monk archetype. You deliver curses instead of stunning your opponent. That's kind of the thing. It's a little bit more magical based. It's almost like a witch version of the monk, but exactly how it ties into the Harrow deck and the Harrow theme, it's a little strange.
Oh, it's extremely strange. The paper says that the book says that the Harrow Warden fulfills this role as she seeks to bring her mind and body into alignment, and she protects her people by invoking folklore that has guided them for so long. So it's kind of implied that this archetype, rather than being like someone who actually practices Harrow, this is like somebody who travels in one of the caravans and they grow up with all these stories, and I guess they use that for. They use that folklore in order to help protect their people. Like it's more like a weird monk archetype that functions as like some kind of crazy bodyguard for the Harrow. I don't know how this is supposed to fit in with Harrow lore, but it is a really cool archetype. My favorite thing about this is the Eclipse Strike at 15th level. It replaces Quivering Palm, and Quivering Palm is like the one-shot kill spell, so you expect this to be good. And then you read what it does, and the monk punches someone, and their punch turns that animal into a little critter like Baleful Polymorph. And it's the funniest thing it's the best mental image. Can you just imagine going up to someone and just giving them a jawbreaker, and then their jaw flops up, and then poof, there's just a squirrel there. I love this archetype. Then you also just have you have some great names for this one. This is an example of where sometimes just presentation alone can sell this idea, because I have no idea how this is supposed to fit in with Harrowers and their caravans, but when you have an attack called Idiot Strike, and it talks about basically giving you this bonus, like a jinxed bonus on attack rolls, saving throws, and skill checks, it's just like, okay, you've sold me. I love this archetype. I can't even say anything bad about it, even if it doesn't make sense.
I'll even give a shout out to the mute hag stance. It's really different ability. Your presence eliminates morale and insight bonuses. So just by being there, you're throwing people off. So for a second there, they had this morale. They were like, yeah, no, I really know what's going on. I'm really, really jived to get in today. Oh, this guy's weird. There's something, like you're just throwing people off their game just by being there.
And, when you think about it, that's a really nasty ability. Like, that basically shuts down Barbarian and Blood Rager PCs. Because those raging bonuses are morale benefits. I mean, like, you still have your rage powers and your bloodline powers, respectively, but you lose, like, the number one reason you went into rage in the first place. And if you think about it, this is nullifying your morale bonus to Constitution, meaning your hit points go down. Like, it's a really nasty ability, and I've never seen anything like it. This is an archetype to check out just because it's so different.
I think it would have fit better into the Varissia. What are the name of the Varissia book?
Oh yeah, something of Legends, right?
Birthplace of Legends, because it definitely fits into the region, and it's adding Clar as a monk weapon in the proficiencies. That's really flavorful. It just, it's still just a head scratcher how it ties into the Harrow deck exactly.
Again, I'm just going to say, something, something, caravan, something, something, folklore, something, something, punch people into squirrels. That's all you need. That's it. I'm just, everyone roll 15th level monks. I know you can't do it in Pathfinder Society, so I'm sorry you won't be able to uppercut people into rabbits, but for the rest of us, let's all go and uppercut someone into a rabbit. Like, wouldn't that be a great way to finish off a Rune Lord?
That would be such a weird way. Every single time you use that ability, it's going to be strange. People are just going to be like, where did he go? There's
a bunny.
This turtle here. I don't understand.
All right, so before I gush any more about the Horror Warden, we should probably move on to the word I can't pronounce, Swindler.
The
The
Zarni Swindler.
Scarny. How did you know that?
I've heard it pronounced by Pathfinder players, Pathfinder Society players, I should say.
Okay. Well, you know what? You do have more experience than me than that, so it makes sense. Um, the Scarny Swindler archetype has what could potentially be the most powerful replacement for trap finding I've ever seen the rogue get. And that's saying something because rogue archetypes are traditionally very weak. You don't get many that are much better than the ninja, which is an alternate class, or the scout, which has the awesome ability to sneak attack while charging and moving. Mm. And this particular ability, it's called Let Fate Decide, and basically when you pick two different actions that you are going to take on your next turn as a standard action, and then you flip a coin or roll a die or draw a horror card or just do something that'll let you determine which one you're getting. And then you gain a luck bonus equal to, it's actually a really big luck bonus, half your rogue level to for 1 minute to perform that action. So, like, it's just, okay, here's this massive bonus. And, you know, I've written about it before in guidance. The rogue is one of the only classes in the game that has a medium base attack bonus that doesn't have some way to boost its attack bonus. Like, it doesn't, like, bards can inspire courage in themselves, investigators can add intelligence. And you get this ability that, yeah, it's random, but it's a massive bonus to whatever you want. Like, there are other abilities in this class. Like, you get a bonus to fool people who are trying to spot your sleight of hand attempts. And you also get a static skill bonus on Bluff, Profession Gambler, and Sense Motive checks. You gain a bonus on Will to Will saves for a rogue. That's huge. And then there's also ability where you can re-roll a d20 once per day, and then you gain more uses as you level up. This is probably one of the strongest rogue archetypes I've ever seen. Like, right off of the bat, this class gets a baseline bonus on bluff checks. If you built a rogue that was designed around feinting, for example, every round you choose attack rolls or bluff checks, and you flip your coin to your die. If you build around that particular subset, you're going to be doing both of them each turn to try to sneak attack. No matter what you pick, you're going to be getting a good benefit out of this archetype. It's a really, really good one. I mean, you lose some great stuff, too. You lose evasion for it. It basically trades out every single rogue ability except for rogue talents. So it's a fairly big archetype, but at the same time, it's just a very cool and good one.
It's basically the con artist archetype. It's practically an alternate class. It's so robust and so different from the base class.
Indeed.
I mean, it still gets sneak attack, but that almost doesn't feel appropriate for the class anymore.
You know what? If you build around feinting, you're conning someone into lowering their guard. I guess you could call it that, but I agree with you. This is like, no, I'm not saying that that's a bad thing, that it feels so different, because it's kind of nice to have a rogue archetype that feels different. We've had monks that feel different. We have fighters that feel different. We've had every other class in the game get archetypes that make it feel really different. But the rogue really has some sacred cows that archetype designers don't like touching. And this one basically throws out every class feature except for sneak attack and rogue talents. So it's like it's really like a shock the first time you read it if you don't know what's coming. You're like, everything's gone. They blew it up. They blew the rogue up. And then it's like, oh, wait, wow, this is actually a pretty good archetype.
On the thematic side, it's actually got a very brief description of the archetype, probably just because it needed so much word count to explain Let Fate Decide, the Two-Face ability that it starts with. Yeah. But it doesn't need much description to get the point across. It's a Zarni Swindler, so the Zarnis are automatically, they're the least trusted people in all of Varissia, and it's got Swindler in the name, which tells you exactly what you need to know. But it justifies a lot of times any of the flavor about Harrowers. It's about how they're not trusted, they're looked down upon. A lot of people think that they're just out to take their money, like real-world fortune tellers. And this is the class that makes it harder for all of the other Harrow-related classes, because this is the one that's ruining their reputation.
Yep, exactly. And I'm going to say, I've officially added Two-Face now to my iconic design list. So, it was like, a light bulb! This is totally Two-Face! So when you guys see this, Ryan's going to get a credit on it, and you'll know it came from this podcast. So, fun stuff. But yeah, this is like Ryan said, the archetype that basically makes all harrowers look bad. And if you see the artwork that goes along with it, like it goes on a page about gambling, and you have this great picture of this guy who's like trying to get this woman to like pick a card, any card, and he's literally using like prestidigitation to pull all the coins out of her purse while she's not looking. It's great. Like this is the archetype that needed to be on this page, and it's just, you know what? It's like the Harrow Warden, but it's great and awesome and cool for completely different reasons. That one is just so crazy for a monk archetype because it's just so supernatural and weird. And this one is crazy for a rogue archetype because it really redefines what it means to be a rogue. This feels like a rogue class, you know?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Next up, we've got an archetype that really impressed me, and that is the Story Summoner. It only replaces, or it only modifies a couple of abilities, but it modifies the big ones. It modifies your Eidolon. It is a summoner archetype, just in case that wasn't clear by the name. And instead of you just having a straightforward Eidolon and being able to summon monsters like you normally would, you are gaining benefits based on your cards. So, yes, you've got your Eidolon, and unlike normal Eidolons, he's not immune to protection from blank spells. But you can use a Harrow card to randomly change the alignment of your Eidolon. And a lot of the flavor, and the name of it being the Story Summoner, is that you are giving somebody a reading, or you are telling a story by just laying out the cards and seeing what naturally comes based on your insight into the cards. And then this magical fireworks are going off with just like, and the evil beast attacks, and suddenly your Eidolon turns from whatever, maybe a neutral, good, rabbit-looking thing to this terrible beast. It's got the same evolutions, but its alignment has changed, and now things just got scarier. Plus, it gains a bonus to the ability score linked to the card that's drawn, which kind of enhances the story that you're telling.
It's definitely a cool one. There are some things I would have liked seen a little bit different with this archetype. Specifically, I would have liked to seen no, I mean, granted, I can't imagine the amount of space this would have wasted for this book, so I can understand why this didn't happen. For those of you who remember Ultimate Magic, this archetype actually comes with an Eidolon model, meaning that if you want a pre-built Eidolon, this one gives you an option for that. You don't have to use it for this archetype, but if you want to use this Storykin Eidolon, which is described as like a mass of swirling cards and mystic energy, then this works pretty good for this archetype. I would have loved to see if they made builds for like every card that has like a person on it, like a rabbit Eidolon, and then the archetype actually trades out like preset Eidolon models. Like you have to pick one of these Eidolon models, but then as you draw cards, if you draw certain cards, they change. That would have been really cool, but I can't imagine the amount of space that would have needed, Ryan. Like that would have been ridiculous.
It actually, I think one of the reasons that I liked this this archetype, and what you were saying would have definitely enhanced that. I read a book about the tarot where I think like all the power went out in a bar, and so to entertain themselves, people just started doing stories based on the tarot deck, and then they would bridge off of it, and it was becoming this giant like Scrabble game. Only instead of building letters, you're building stories going in all the different directions, and it was a very vivid, evocative book, and I don't know if that had any influence on the design of the Story Summoner, but it's definitely the similar idea.
Definitely. Now let's talk about one thing that's very interesting about this archetype. It actually nerfs the summoner. Makes summoner a little bit weaker. This archetype for the story ability, Ryan mentions that drawing cards changes this the Eidolon. How that's represented is this mechanic that basically forces the Eidolon to be subjected to protection from evil, magic circle from evil, all of those types of abilities. And by drawing cards, your alignment changes. So, like, you know, 1 minute you might have the Rakshasa activated, and now you're blocked by evil, some magic circles against evil. And then you draw another card, and now it's good. So now it can go through that circle. So, on one hand, it is like a definite power down for the summoner, but it's not like a huge one because, let's face it, not many people roll around with protection from evil, magic circle from evil. But
you're overlooking the +4 enhancement bonus to an ability score, which is always useful.
You know what? It is always useful. I agree with you, but I think that when we're talking about just a +1, or even in this case a +4, I mean a +2 or even a +4, that's really not even worth a CR adjustment. You know what I'm saying? It's in the grand scheme of things, it's a pretty small bonus, especially considering it's a bonus you can't really control. So you do get a benefit for it, but in the long run, it's not a huge benefit, and you take a penalty that's not really all that huge too. It's just very interesting to see an archetype that kind of does weaken the Summoner's Eidolon a little bit, because without question, that's the number one thing people complain about that class for. That and the spell list, but
Well, then I'm going to compare it to the next archetype, which is the Suit Seeker, and it's an Inquisitor archetype. And I'm going
that's
to compare it in that they both add an element of randomness to the class, and I guess similar to the Zarni Swindler. But what I like about the Suit Seeker and how that works is that most of the time the Inquisitor is like, I call this judgment at this time, and it's like, you are going to pay for your crimes, which totally makes sense. It's exactly what that class is supposed to be.
Mhm.
But the Suit Seeker, it specifically calls out a couple of domains, one of which is knowledge, and I thought that was a little strange. But if you have the luck domain, most of your abilities are about gaining luck and controlling luck, which doesn't quite go with any, I am an Inquisitor of luck. Like, for whatever reason, I chose this path of luck. This is what I'm completely devoted to. Whereas the Suit Seeker, which changes up, it's with things like its improvised array, where you're drawing a certain number of cards, and that's giving you bonuses to your different judgments. That's cool, and it shows that for whatever reason you were super dedicated to luck. Now it's paying off, and it's kind of you are at the mercy of luck.
It is definitely a cool one, and I like how that archetype calls out fate as one of the possible subdomains, because this is just my opinion, of course, but if you're gonna be a Inquisitor who is also into Harrow and is taking the Suit Seeker archetype, fate is probably a bit more appropriate than luck, just because of the difference in what those words mean. But yeah, it's definitely a very cool archetype. One of the things about playing the Inquisitor that I've always said is that it's a class that requires you to know a lot to play it. Like, you have to know all about the list of judgments and what benefits they give. Some of them are pretty different. This is kind of like, it's taking a little bit of the choice out of judgment, but at the same time it's giving you a better benefit, and it's almost making it like, I don't want to call it fun, but you can switch judgments as a swift action. It is fun. It's almost addicting, like gambling. Like, you're spinning the roulette and waiting to see which judgment you land on, which is pretty cool. I bet that would be really frustrating if you needed healing and you wanted Judgment of Healing, and you get like resistance bonus or sacred bonus to saving throws. But it's a cool archetype. I really like this one. I think this archetype would be a blast to play, especially if you're into gosh, there is a class in Final Fantasy X, or I mean, I don't know, it's Final Fantasy X-2, where you're basically like a little like roulette bar appears on the screen. No, that is Final Fantasy X. It's Wakka's Limit Break, where like you have to stop the slot machine at specific places in order to get his best attack. And this is what that archetype feels like. It's got a really cool feel. I really like this book for the randomness it's put into these classes.
Well, and just more of that is the Eye of Harrow, which replaces Detect Alignment. And Detect Alignment, in a lot of investigation things, it basically means that if a guy is evil and has no way of disguising his alignment, then the Inquisitor walks up, detects all of the different alignments that might be at play right now, says, that guy's evil, let's deal with him, he's the guy that's about to be a traitor. Whereas Eye of the Harrow, you are drawing, I believe you're drawing, oh, it's your improvised array, so you're drawing 2 to 6, depending on your level cards, and you are gaining a bonus to hit against people who match that alignment, and if it matches the alignment perfectly, you're getting a +2 bonus to hit. So if you're walking into a room and it's like, one of you is a traitor, let's see what the cards have to say. Oh, I've got insight into hitting chaotic evil characters. Let's see what what happens now. Like, it draws out this scene instead of just being a detect alignment moment that's over like that. You can really like add drama to it, really add intrigue to it. You can play psychological games with it. It's way more fun than the detect alignment problem, which kills so much investigation and encounters.
Mm-hmm. Another cool thing about this class that I was double checking just to look at it. It has a Yahtzee mechanic. If you get 5 cards that are all in the same suit in your array, you gain a +4 enhancement bonus to that suit. And we were talking about enhancement bonuses before. On one hand, a +4 isn't going to be enough to overcome your belt or your headband at high levels, but it's still pretty neat. It's like, look at me, Yahtzee, +4 to my intelligence. I like that. Everything you said is 100% true, though. This archetype also modifies a couple of the baseline judgments a little bit. It changes up smiting, it changes up resilience. Really, this archetype modifies how the Inquisitor functions against alignment. And on one hand, it makes a lot of sense because the Inquisitor needs to be neutral on one axis. So either they're neutral good, neutral evil, lawful neutral, or chaotic neutral. I think they can be true neutral too. Yeah, they can be true neutral. So you need that neutral element, and then everything else in this class does crazy special abilities based on the alignment of whatever you're doing, which again is more randomness to this. It's definitely a cool class if you're looking for someone, a player character that's really you don't really have much control over, in the sense that you're really allowing the dice in your Harrow deck to decide what's going on.
And, the Inquisitor is that class that's really into something, usually really into a god. And there are people that are really into fortune telling, really into astrology, really into something like a tarot deck. So that's what this character is. I'm always thinking of, like, whenever I'm thinking of the Inquisitor, I'm thinking of the guy that is just 100% gung-ho for something. So in this case, you're just gung-ho for Harrow.
Definitely. And I mean, the nice thing is that even in Pathfinder Society, the Inquisitor technically doesn't need to worship a deity. It helps, but they don't have to according to the rules. It's not like the Cleric where Pathfinder Society makes you worship a god. So I think we have only, like, what? We have, like, oh no, we have, are we talking about the 2 alternate class options, the Mystery and the Order in this one? We have
Sure, go ahead.
Okay, quick rundown. There's a Cavalier order. It's called the Order of the Hammer. It's a very strange name. It has more to do with the card suit than actual hammers, because it gives you a lot of bonuses to unarmed strikes and wrestling and stuff. As we're going on with the Monk, this is a Cavalier order that does not feel like any other Cavalier order you've ever seen. When I picture a knight in shining armor, I don't picture a guy on the ground, wrestling with people. It's actually a pretty cool image, I think. Overall, other than that, it doesn't really have any of the random Harrowy elements of the rest of the book has. It's kind of more about decision making, which again is a little bit strange to be in this book. You get a lot of really cool grappling abilities, and you get a really nasty ability where you can grant your allies and yourself a +4 morale bonus on melee attack rolls, damage rolls, combat maneuver checks, fortitude saves, and strength checks for a number of rounds per day equal to half your Cavalier level, and then you can spread it out throughout the day, kind of like a bardic performance. But even though those abilities are cool, it's kind of like the Harrow Warden, in that I'm kind of left thinking I'm not quite sure why this is in here. We've seen a lot of Cavalier orders from Paizo as of late. This is one of the less impressive ones. I mean, mechanically it's awesome, but thematically and what book it's put in, I'm kind of not overwhelmed by it. It's no Order of the Flame, Ryan.
Right.
And the last one is the long-awaited Solar Mystery for Oracles. Now, granted, we have heavens, which is stars and celestial bodies. The Solar Mystery is based around basically using it's astrology. It's using the sun and stars to predict the future. Kind of a good thing, kind of a bad thing. When I heard Solar Mystery, I was kind of hoping for something more Apollo-y, since Apollo is a huge patron of oracles in Greek mythology. But this revelation and all the revelations are really cool in this one. You get some really interesting spells as bonus spells. You get Dimension Door. It's like, oh, that's really nasty. You also get Sunburst, Sicaro, and Flame Sphere. A bunch of spells that are not usually on the Oracle spell list. I believe Sunburst is Druid only normally. And then from there, the Revelations. This is one of the few mysteries I've seen come out of a non-core rulebook product where all the Revelations are different. Normally, you have a couple that are like, hey, this is like this revelation from this mystery, which, there's no problem with that if it's thematic. But it's just really cool to see, oh, wow, here are like 10 new revelations that are unique to this particular mystery. I think my favorite one in this whole list is called Sunstride. It's the Shadow Dancer's shadow jump, but for sunlight. It's awesome, and it doesn't become at will like the Shadow Dance. I think the Shadow Dancers becomes at will. It either caps out the same or whatever. It maxes out with 320 feet, which is a lot, and it's just this is a cool one. You have a lot of names that refer to mythology. Serpent in the Sun is one of them, referring to Ra. It's a luminous form. You turn into living light, and then you cap it off with a final revelation that causes you to stop aging. And anytime you cast a teleportation spell or a spell with a fire or light descriptor, the spell is enlarged without affecting the spell's level, which is pretty cool. So you can teleport more people. The effect goes all around, and it's all around just a really interesting, different mystery that I think looks like it'll be fun to play. I think it looks like it'll be a lot of fun to play, actually. It's not as blasty as Fire, and it's not as combat-oriented as Battle or Nature, but if you want an Oracle that's different, this is a really good mystery.
I was considering using my Dompier Pathfinder Society boon to build a light-based caster, kind of just to really stick it to vampires who are light-sensitive, and here I am, just made of pure light and just walking around and teleporting in the light. But that adds a lot of complication. Like, that's a complicated combination of class and race. And
isn't there a Daywalker or a Dayborn trait you could take?
I believe there is. It would kind of, I think it would be important, because there's a couple of times where I would actually be doing, like, either positive energy damage in a circle or something else that would not be good for the Dompier.
Oh, definitely. But I mean, if you wanted to stick it to vampires, there isn't many better ways to do it than Sunburst.
Mm-hmm.
Boom! Everyone explodes. So yeah, I like that one. It's a good one. Go ahead.
Oh, I'm just based on the current storyline in the Deadpool comics. This is actually a good way to make Dazzler.
Yeah, that's true. Do I have to add that to my list too? I think so.
Dazzler Vampire Hunter.
Oh man, look at this! All of these iconic designs that have stuff to do with the Harrow. I wonder if by the time get this blog, oh, that's why he did.
Let's just finish off by talking about some of the other options that are available to enhance your Harrow theme, or just to give a Harrow theme to maybe a character that's just from Varissia, but you don't want to go full Harrow. The Harrow Mat is a nice item that when you are doing a Harrow reading, which again, if you don't have any of the abilities, it actually has no effect. But in this case, it gives you a +4 bonus to bluff or diplomacy to convince someone that you know something about their future. So diplomacy, I guess, would be to let them off easy, or to, console somebody that's just, oh, my husband died and it's the worst. And then bluff would be if you're just trying to get their money, or you're trying to convince them to be in the wrong place at the wrong time.
You guys can't see it, but I'm cracking up at that.
I didn't think it was that funny, but all right.
It was great. I mean, imagine you're a Saranzi swindler getting there trying to console somebody and using bluff with the Harrow Mat. That's great. Then we also have the deck of Slivering Fate, which is also from the Harrow Handbook. It is a special magical Harrow deck that you can use with Deadly Dealer. It deals slashing damage and doubles the Arcane Strike bonus when used with Deadly Dealer. So, yeah, there is a special deck that you can take to kill people with. Wonderful stuff, especially if you're that witch archetype where the cards are returning.
It costs 13,000 gold pieces, which is a lot, although if you're the witch and you're getting the cards back, that feels a lot more justified. And it also acts as a +1 Limning Harrow deck, which is a new weapon special ability that's in Ultimate Equipment, and it says on a successful strike against a creature affected by a means of magical concealment, the weapon outlines the creature in fairy fire for 1 round. So if you're attacking an invisible creature and one of your darts hits, suddenly they're sparkling.
Oh, this is wonderful. I love this. This is that's a great item.
But
Whoever's that one,
13,000 gold pieces.
you know what? For a magic shimmering Harrow deck that is specifically designed to work with Deadly Dealer, 13,000 is a steal.
Hmm.
I mean, if you think about it, a +2 weapon is already worth 8,000 gold. So that means that the double arcane strike bonus is worth about 5,000. If you wanted to draw up the lightning ability, you could ask your GM, and it would probably change it to be about 7,000. I think so.
Okay.
Yeah,
I'm trying to follow your math.
yeah. It's because a +2 weapon is 2,000. A +1 weapon is 2,000.
Yep.
And if it's 5,000 for this ability, because a +2 weapon is 8,000. The difference between 13,000 and 8,000 is 5,000. So a +1 version with no lining special ability would be 7,000.
Oh, okay. But wouldn't you want the liming special ability? That seemed to be what you were most excited about.
I would want the liming special ability, but if you really want a super awesome Harrow deck to kill people with that doesn't have that ability yet because you're cheap, 7,000 gold could do it. I'm not cheap though. I would want to outline people in Fairy Fire.
There's also a couple of Harrow archetypes. One of them is the Harrow deck of many things. Sorry, not archetypes, artifacts. That's not something that, like, when I was conceiving this section, I wasn't thinking that you're building a character that's got access to an artifact. I was thinking about what you'd be building your character, what you have control over. So there are 3 traits that are relevant to a Harrower, one of which is Fortunate. It is a magic trait. And once per day, when you are randomizing an effect, you can pick twice and choose the result. Now, it doesn't specifically call out that that includes harrowing or using a Harrow deck, but it does say that one of the character concepts you can use this for, and this is from Quests and Campaigns, by the way, one of the character concepts you can use it for is a Harrow Reader. So it doesn't specifically say cards, but it does imply it, and that, I would say, confirms it. But really, this would be great with the Zarni Swindler, because you're coin flipping or whatever you're doing to determine that first ability it has, which I'm going to look up right now because I forget the name of it. Let fate decide. You could be fortunate, and when you're letting fate decide, you can have a hand in exactly what fate decides for you.
That would roughly bump up your chance to get the one you want to about 75%, 3 out of 4 times. That's really good. Now we're taking a rogue archetype that's already really good and making it better. This is kind of like the archaeologist bard archetype and taking the I think it's called the fortune favored trait from Ultimate Campaign that boosts any luck bonuses you get by 1, and then that archetype has a constant luck bonus ability. Yeah, it's really good because it basically lets you be better than a standard bard at buffing yourself with that bardic performance. So this trait is to the Scarny Swindler to what that trait is for the archaeologist.
Then there are 2 racial boons. They're human racial boons. One of them specifically is a Varisian racial boon, which comes from Varisia, Birthplace of Legend. That's the Harrow Chosen. You begin play with a Harrow deck, and you get a +2 caster level for divination spells. And twice per week, you can cast Augury using your Harrow deck.
That's really good for a trait.
Whereas the Harrow Born, which can be any type of human, you start with a Harrow deck. So once again, that's 100 gold pieces you're getting for free. And you get +1 initiative. +1 on initiative checks.
So basically, if you're building any of those archetypes that require the Deadly Dealer fee, you're taking one of these traits and you're going to like it because you need that free 100 gold Harrow deck, man.
300 gold Harrow deck.
Free 100.
Oh, free 100. Yes. So those are the Harrow Crunch options for you to explore the various different ways you can build a character with a Harrow power source, with a Magic Fortune cards as the theme. Alex, anything you want to call out that we may have missed or kind of gone over a little too quickly?
There are a lot of cool feats in the Harrow Handbook, too. None of them are really Harrow-themed. They're kind of just there. Most of them fall under the Hammer suit, so if you were wondering why we didn't talk about them, it's because they're cool, but they're not really like, oh my gosh, every Harrow character ever needs this. Last thoughts. Heaven's Oracle Mystery is really good for a Harrower, the Prestige class. There's a Harrow Bloodline, too, for Sorcerers. We didn't talk about that. Generally speaking, that Bloodline doesn't really the bloodline powers itself are, they're standard sorcerer fare. What's really cool about that one is the bloodline arcana, where you basically, whenever you cast a spell that has like a percentile chance to happen, like teleport I think is listed, augury, divination. I don't think the sorcerer gets those though. I'm not quite sure, but I'm actually going to read it right out of the book because it is a really cool bloodline arcana, and I'm all about cool bloodline arcanas. Whenever you cast a divination spell that requires a percentage roll, add 5 to the result of your roll. In addition, you can roll the percentage die twice and use the result you prefer. Your maximum percentage chance for receiving meaningful and accurate replies for divination spells is 100% instead of the usual 90. So no, there's no teleportation there, my bad. But yeah, and there are a lot. They get a good list of spells on their baseline bonus spell list. They get augury, which is probably one of the better ones. They don't get divination, which is a little disappointing. I don't think that's normally a sorcerer spell, is it, Ryan? I think it's a clerical.
I'm gonna have to take your word for it. I don't know spells that well.
Okay, I think it is. If you want to correct me on the forums, please do. But they have, the list is all spells that require that, and more importantly, bloodline arcanas apply to any spells you cast. They don't just apply to sorcerer spells. There was an FAQ about that a while ago. So technically speaking, you could take one level in this bloodline as a sorcerer and then go into something else that has more of these spells and get this awesome benefit. The other bloodline powers are cool. They're not necessarily like anything ridiculously strong, but that's really the awesome thing about this bloodline, and I thought that bloodline arcana deserved a shout out before we wrap things up.
Yeah, I'm gonna give special attention to Invoke the Harrow, which you get at 9th level, which is unfortunate that you get it so high level because you draw a random Harrow card, you take on superficial traits featured on the card, and gain a +4 enhancement bonus on the ability score associated with the card's suit. So I mean, you're doing it for the +4 enhancement bonus, but the idea that at random you can look like a rabbit, you can look like any of the crazy cards that the Harrow deck features, that if you're the kind of person that could really give a flavorful description of your action, this is a great bloodline for you.
How would you look like the big sky?
Maybe you would just your skin would just turn blue with the occasional cloud.
That is a really good on-the-fly description. I approve. You are now a cloud person, everybody who uses this bloodline. I don't think there are any bloodlines that are really worth cross-blooding with this one at a quick glance. There are a couple enchantments. So if you wanted to go Fae, one of the things this bloodline gets that's really good is it's got Ill Omen as a bonus spell. It's normally a witch-only spell. Basically, you curse someone and you force them to re-roll successful rolls made against you. It's a really nasty debuff, and if you combine that with the Fey Bloodline's ability to get a higher penalty on enchantment effects, it can be really nasty. Really nasty. I mean, granted, enchantment spells are historically save or suck. This one is no exception, but it doesn't get much worse than having to re-roll every successful thing you do. I think it's a maximum of 3 rolls per spell cast based on your level, but that's one of those spells, man, that's really going to annoy a GM.
Have you ever played a Harrow-themed character? What are some of the options? No, I wasn't asking you, Alex. I was talking to our listeners.
Whoops. Sorry, guys. I'm totally stealing all of your thunder. Go on.
It's all right. This is how we conclude the episodes. You can share your thoughts at nodirectionpodcast.com. I don't know if we'll have a forums by the time this episode airs, but you can definitely find the comments section for episode 246, Harrow Crunch. And until next time, I'm Ryan Costello Jr.
I'm interrupting everything he says. Also known as Alex.
There we go. And you are always welcome in our private sanctuary. Oh, that reminds me. Did you notice that they actually use the term private sanctuary in the Oracle Revelation?
They do. Isn't that great? So you must have a fan who was writing for Paizo.
I'm curious, because it was originally, the podcast was named after the Private Sanctum and the Sanctuary spells mushed together, because Jay and I couldn't decide on a single spell to name the podcast after. So we went with Private Sanctuary, and That's actually a unique combination of words. So the fact that it showed up in the book, I wonder if either somebody did that as a shout out to us or just somewhere in the back of their mind that term, like we'd put that term in their brain.
I like to think that you guys did the second one because I mean, who talks to the developers more than you guys? Well, James Jacobs talks to everybody, but
Well,
still.
yes. The Paizo staff talks to each other more than we talk to the Paizo staff, I would hope. Oh, all right, I'm stopping the broadcast.